In this section we will review the legal requirements and limitations derived from Delaware law and regulations of security agencies and guards in the state. Before you apply for your Delaware security license, you should understand your full criminal background as it may affect your ability to obtain a security license in Delaware. Conviction of a felony, for example, is an automatic disqualification under the law. Other misdemeanor crimes involving theft, drug use, or what can be defined as crimes of moral turpitude can keep you from holding a license. Some crimes have a statute of limitations, in other words an elapsed time period for how long they can be held against you. It is important you know your criminal history and be honest with professional licensing. Moving beyond background checks, licensed security officers are required to have their identification card, which is their license, in their possession when performing security guard duties. The only exception would be a new applicant who has been advised by an email from professional licensing they are approved to work for 15 days prior to physically having their ID card in hand. Professional licensing is the operational and enforcement arm of the board, and their inspectors do conduct on-site ID card checks of licensed security personnel. Should a licensed security guard be arrested and/or charged with any crime, they are obligated by law to inform the professional licensing section of the state police within 5 business days. Failure to do so may result in a license suspension. Professional licensing is eventually advised of all criminal charges made against license holders, but the regulation does require a licensee to report. Not all crimes will be grounds for an automatic emergency suspension. Most traffic violations, short of felony DUI, will not require a notification. Instruction and certifications must be conducted by an authorized trainer. Weapons training aside from a firearm must be conducted according to weapon manufacturer standards. Firearm trainers are individually certified by professional licensing. Regulation 10.0 requires security patches, badges, seals, and security vehicle markings to be approved by the Board of Examiners. All 10.0 regulations are intended so the public is able to distinguish between police officers and security.
In the previous section, you begin to hear about Title 24, which covers the law and regulations related to security guards in Delaware. Those topics obviously cover the technical points of the job. This section will dive deeper into providing you with an understanding of the law, in particular Title 11, which is the Delaware Criminal Code. In the last section, we covered how a security guard is legally defined. Here we will explain what legal authority you possess as a security guard, and even to some degree as a private citizen, irrespective of your employment status. We will also discuss some of the legal protections the law extends to you and under what circumstances they may become necessary to utilize. Some of these matters can be somewhat confusing within the security industry, including the ability to detain persons, the limitations and jurisdictional boundaries of security personnel, and above all, your personal safety. Security guards should view decision-making on the job almost with the idea of it being a triangle. One side being the officer, another side being his or her employer, the security agency they work for, and to some degree the third side being the client. In our opening segment over here, we discussed the company and client relationship. You need to be careful because they may not always align, they being your company and your client and the decisions that you're making according to the law. Now, the law applies to everyone, and your client or company cannot supersede the law. For example, the law does not permit security guards to issue traffic citations. Therefore, your company or your client cannot somehow empower you to pull over vehicles and cite drivers for speeding violations. On the other side, the law does not compel security agencies to grant authority to security guards in an employment circumstance. For example, Delaware law provides some legal authority for a merchant's agent to detain shoplifters in Delaware in certain circumstances. Your company and or your client may restrict this and not permit you to detain anyone. While the law may allow you to detain, your company is saying no, so that is what you need to follow. So there is a distinction, and here is the nexus. If you are enforcing property rules and regulations, some of them can be illegal acts. They're not always, but regardless, you're performing your duties as a security guard. And you might come across people that, for instance, are violating the property rules and regulations. Maybe they're trespassers. They're not supposed to be on the property. They were previously banned. Maybe it's somebody who's acting unusual or contrary to normal conditions associated with the property. They're being suspicious. You're going to be approaching these people. You're going to be having conversations with them. All right? And all of this constitutes situations which are normal issues for a security guard to be dealing with. During this presentation, we have alluded to one legal carve-out in Delaware law where security guards have legal authority to detain, which is in the case of shoplifting or retail theft. But you, again, are reminded to fully understand the law and the directives from your company and your client. Not all company and clients will allow you to detain or even make contact with shoplifters. Shoplifting in Delaware is defined in Title 11, Section 840. Generally, theft under $1,500 is considered a misdemeanor, while theft over that amount is a felony. There are several things which would constitute a shoplifting in Delaware. So just that we're sure about these legal definitions, the difference between reasonable suspicion and probable cause, and there's a reason why I'm going to great lengths to be able to point this out. Reasonable suspicion is the step before probable cause, and at that point you have what appears to be a crime that may have been committed. The situation escalates to probable cause when it becomes obvious that a crime has been committed. And the thing that makes it obvious, again, is evidence. Now, evidence can be CCTV footage. It can be a witness telling it. It can be you or somebody that's near the scene, a manager or whatnot, that actually witnesses the shoplifting in this circumstance occur. Okay, that's your evidence at that point in time, and that's where it becomes probable cause. So it's important for you to be able to distinguish the difference. A lot of times merchants will, have that first step in line, and they'll have a lot of suspicions, but they won't have anything to conclusively say, yes, this person actually did this. And if you don't, when you go to court, you're not going to be able to prove that case, and it's going to be thrown out. And then that's when a merchant has the potential to face a false arrest suit, those type of legal ramifications. So if you learn nothing else during your training, and I hope that would not be the case, but please always remember to understand and consider your threat environment, which is something that we've said a few times and we will continue to say as we go through this training. Why would you put your personal safety at risk, or why would you potentially jeopardize your criminal culpability or even maintaining your employment based on some of the things that potentially can get you in trouble? Now, being in the industry for the time that I have seen quite a bit. I've seen and heard of a lot of different stories. I've heard of security guards doing this, doing that. And, a lot of it goes back to training, goes back to what were they initially told, what were they initially understanding, were they confused about their job role? And, that's a big part of why we do this type of training, is to make sure that security guards understand what their role is, what the law says, and what their companies are saying, obviously. So just a few examples of things that are absolutely going to get you in trouble and are not a road that you want to go down. Pursuing or chasing or following anybody off of your property. Okay, as a security guard, you have limited authority on the property that you actually protect to begin with. All right, you certainly don't have law enforcement authority, so none of that authority would exist whatsoever once you're off of a property that you're assigned to, or that your company has a contractual relationship with them. So it stops right then and there. Even on the property, as far as chasing people, following them in vehicles, those type of things, you want to be very careful about that. You want to do it from a perspective of surveillance as opposed to pursuing, if you will. You're not going after people with the lights on and looking to stop their vehicles or stop them when they're moving or walking or trying to exit the property. And if that happens, then that becomes a law enforcement function at that point in time. That's when you notify law enforcement, and if they're able to locate that person who committed a crime on your property off of your property, then that's their function. That's not your function as a security guard. So it sounds like a simple concept, but a lot of times people can get caught up in the moment. So always remember, where you work in those parameters. So while it is essential for security officers to understand how the law regulates their role in protecting persons and property, they also need to realize they absolutely have a right to defend themselves, which is a fundamental right inherent to any citizen. Use of force in protecting themselves or others should be looked at in the same way any normal citizen would do from a legal perspective. Hopefully, self-defense is not an issue you will deal with on a daily basis, but security officers can find themselves in situations where their personal safety may be in jeopardy, or they may find themselves in a situation where they are attempting to protect another person or persons from harm. Before deciding on a career or a job in security work, a candidate should have several gut check moments, if you will. This is not meant to sound overly dramatic. You simply need to understand who you are as a person. While most people will be upset and react to someone attempting to hurt them, it is imperative to remember this may occur. And yes, it will almost certainly upset or anger you to some degree. While someone attempting to hurt you will need to be addressed, it needs to be done in proportion. Defensive force can never be used for revenge against an offender. Should someone challenge you, maybe even invite you to take off your badge and fight them, and you fall for this, it's because you simply must defend your honor, or whatever else might be on your mind at that time. This may not be a job for you if that is the way that you're going to react. By no stretch of the imagination am I suggesting you must allow yourself to be a victim. However, an overreaction to a threat or going overboard when reacting to a physical attack is unacceptable. When someone is placed in a situation where they need to defend themselves physically, that decision is dictated by the Delaware law in consideration of the circumstances surrounding the incident. Security agencies should also have an outlined use of force policy for their employees. While the agency would never be able to indicate a security officer could not take measures to protect themselves, as we have stated, they can outline certain parameters. While the law will consider your actions based upon the danger which was present for a person defending themselves, a company may indicate what situations you should refrain from being involved with, such as allowing you to be involved with shoplifting stops, or they may even indicate that you are not to approach persons who might be fighting or have a weapon. It is imperative that you, as an employee, obtain and review your agency use of force policy. Realistically, the agency should be presenting this to you. As mentioned in our legal limitations section, in Delaware, citizens who encounter a threat to their personal safety are required to flee and not to challenge the opponent. Two exceptions to this premise are when you are in your place of residence or when you are at work. A work location is where most on-duty security guards will find themselves, so this exception would apply. So let's say you are on Main Street and you're not on duty, you're not working as a security guard, and you're confronted by someone who is threatening you with physical harm or even someone that has actually physically attacked you. Should you be able to leave or reasonably escape, the law indicates that is your obligation as opposed to staying and responding to the threat or the attack. This duty to flee also differs from state to state, but this is what Delaware law requires. This is why many times when the police respond to a fight or a physical altercation where 2 or more persons are involved in the incident, it is normal for the police to determine that's a case of what we call mutual combatants. In other words, both parties engaged in the fight, and because one person should not have started the fight and the other party had a duty to flee, it is therefore mutual in nature. In this case, both persons might be charged with assault or offensive touching, or neither would be charged. If a person is challenged and in a situation where their only option is to fight back and there is no reasonable way to retreat, then force to defend themselves would be permitted. Regardless, this person must be able to articulate how and why they had no reasonable method to escape. But again, as a reminder, an exception to the duty to flee is being at your place of work or employment. And as an on-duty security guard, again, that would not apply, that requirement to flee would not apply. However, should retreat be your best option, even as a security guard, you would certainly not be compelled to remain. And as Mr. Denny pointed out in a prior section, force of any kind is not justified if you initiated the situation, if you agitated someone or started a fight. This idea of force being used for defensive purposes could obviously not apply in those circumstances. A UFC for security will only include physical measures or steps in the continuum as defensive or protective in nature when force is being threatened or used against them. Law enforcement use of force continuums will include preemptive physical measures as a means of gaining compliance or defending themselves, but they would be legally sanctioned measures reserved specifically for them. Security officers will not use offensive measures to gain compliance. They can use defensive measures to defend themselves if they're attacked or threatened to be attacked. This may be a bit confusing, but we will better understand this when we outline a couple examples in a bit. Law enforcement officers can generally rise one or several levels above the resistance they are being met with. The old adage in law enforcement was always ask the subject to comply, tell them to do so, then, as a last resort, physically make them comply when dealing with an uncooperative subject. But even for police, these levels include many attempts to persuade an offender to comply, especially in today's environment. As you can most likely conclude, security guards will also need to employ their powers of persuasion, sometimes over and over, when dealing with an uncooperative subject or person. And again, security guards cannot resort to physical measures when attempting to gain compliance. They can ask and tell, but making is not within their legal purview. So just to summarize so everyone is clear, a continuum for security guards will be used in 2 distinctive ways. First, to gain compliance. If a subject is violating the property's code of conduct, for example, the security guard will then use the continuum to gain compliance. Security guards can do this, but only to the point where they have exhausted all verbal or mental persuasive options available to them, but they cannot resort to force. In the use of force continuum that we have as an example on the screen before, realistically you can only go to levels 1 and 2 there. When it comes to force being used against a security guard, then yes, a guard or any citizen who has had force used upon them or has force threatened against them can in that situation use force and employ their full continuum as necessary to respond and defend themselves. If the security guard is struck, attacked, or otherwise offensively touched or assaulted, then that security guard can use force to either stop such actions, even preemptively if they see it coming, or when it actually occurs. Just understand explaining why you took action, especially if you took it preemptively, better outline why it was necessary and reasonable. The continuum will apply in outlining how you responded in terms of levels or steps. So we are now at the point in our examples when we need to break apart your response based on the circumstances we outlined. Again, a guard attempting to gain compliance as opposed to a guard being met with physical force. So let's just stay with the first circumstance, which is a guard gaining compliance. With our current examples, a group refusing to stop loitering or leave the area, or a solicitor refusing to stop panhandling, or either of those groups refusing your demand to leave the property. At this stage, when we are talking about gaining compliance, the force continuum technically ends for security. They must seek another remedy to gain compliance. Most likely that would be law enforcement option that we outlined before. Security, again, will not use offensive or physical measures to gain compliance. The guard or guards should not physically interact with the group or the solicitors. They can lead these persons to an entrance using hand gestures or other body language, but realistically they need to refrain from any physical touching. This is often the time when someone violating the rules will actually warn you not to put your hands on them. Not always, but this is perhaps the one time when they actually understand the law and are using it to their advantage. This may also give you pause and perhaps leave you feeling helpless or disappointed, but you are wise to refrain from any physical interaction, stay above the fray, and remember your role and maintain your professionalism. Okay, so there are not too many exam questions that are related to firearms because in this course this is not a firearms training course. Okay, that would be a separate 40-hour course that you would have to take in order to be able to carry a firearm as a security guard. Regardless, there are certain things that we do want you to know that are relevant to the industry in general, and again, that have that potential to be formulated into an exam question. So one thing would be is the difference between a yellow unarmed card and a red firearms card. Okay, obviously the difference is unarmed is the yellow card, and once you satisfy the qualifications for a firearm, you would receive a red card, a firearms card. If anybody is interested in obtaining firearms or red cards, all of this information is outlined on the State Police Professional Licensing website under security guards, the armed security guard sections, and it outlines all of the trainers and all of the training requirements over there. As a general rule of thumb, the minimum amount of force necessary for the situation is the expectation when employing force. Yes, again, you are legally permitted to defend yourself or others who may be in danger, but that immunity is limited. In addition, you will need to be able to clearly articulate why it was necessary, outlining how you had no other choice, or perhaps why you didn't choose a safer option, such as retreat. Simply because the law permits defense under the right circumstances, you will still need to prove it. Moreover, you will need to satisfy your employer that your actions fell within the scope of your employment. In fact, you may be legally correct in defending yourself, but your employer may decide that you placed yourself in a circumstance which was contrary to company policy. For example, if you defended yourself against a shoplifter who was throwing punches at you, but your employer prohibited you from detaining shoplifters to begin with, or even being involved in such investigations, you may be disciplined or terminated. So again, understand what your company or your agency allow you to actually do. If you overstep your authority, even though your intentions might be good, you might even be held criminally liable, especially if force involved was not justified, or was applied incorrectly, or you went too far and reacted emotionally. Remember, as a security guard, you are a regular citizen in the eyes of the law. Police officers in Delaware have some limited immunity when they apprehend individuals or charge people with crimes they are later found not guilty of. This is known as the Police Officers' Bill of Rights in Delaware. Security guards have no such legal protections. Moreover, if their agency or company finds the guards they employ to have operated in circumstances where, again, are outside of the scope of their employment and their training, those guards can bear the financial expenses of legally defending themselves, because at that point they would be terminated. Bottom line, be careful. Understand the law, understand your agency policy, and remember, a professional is always able to keep their emotions in check. So this concludes our section on use of force. We have devoted a decent amount of training time to this subject, and hopefully I've explained it well. Once again, this emphasis on use of force is important so security persons understand their legal obligations, their rights, their limitations, and how they are legally permitted to protect themselves and others. Use of force is not likely to be part of your normal activity as a security guard. As we have outlined, it should be a very rare encounter and hopefully will never become necessary. Regardless, knowledge leads to confidence, which is perhaps the best deterrent against any adversary. For further information on this subject, consult your Delaware Security Study Guides and review the Delaware Criminal Code Title 11 for self-defense. The purpose of cultural awareness training is to focus on principles that hold promise for moving Delaware's security professionals to a higher level of understanding, acceptance, and appreciation of our diversity. Because Delaware has an ever-changing population, training and understanding is essential to assist Delaware security professionals in developing a capacity for identifying and responding to its changing communities. There are several obstacles to diversity, so it's important that we recognize what might be holding us back. Prejudice is an opinion formed based on biases without complete information. It also refers to an irrational hatred of a specific group, often related to ethnic or religious reasons. A conventional, usually oversimplified opinion applied to a particular group is what we know as a stereotype. And now for the benefits of promoting diversity in the workplace. Organizations employing a diverse workforce can supply a greater variety of solutions to problems in service, sourcing, and in the allocation of resources. Employees from diverse backgrounds bring individual talents and experiences in suggesting ideas that are flexible and adapting to fluctuating markets and customer and client demands. In this first introduction section, we will discuss initial response to almost any major incident and outline the specific role in detail the security guard will play from initial response on their part to the arrival of police, fire, or EMS. We will outline also some precautions when responding. For example, security guards are not equipped with breathing apparatus, so we would have them respond to a fire or smoke condition with caution. Many guards also do not carry a firearm. What is their role in a violent intruder incident? We'll look into that as well. Once we have reviewed the basics, we will proceed into specific incident response. These are incidents a security guard has potential to encounter at any time at their property locations, often without any warning. The focus of these sections will be a security guard's initial response to an incident. In particular, response within the first 3 to 5 minutes. For most of these incidents, the job of a security guard will be to assess and initially address incidents prior to the eventual response of professional first responders, such as the police, firefighters, emergency medical service personnel, or paramedics. For most major incidents, these professional responders will be on site, ideally within about 3 to 5 minutes. Security guards are often first on scene and do not have that time lag and must respond in real time before the professional responders are able to do so. Security officers on normal patrol, perhaps on a break period or just arriving at work, are immediately present. At times, incidents unfold right in their presence or within a short distance of their location. Not all incidents will receive a professional response in 3 to 5 minutes. There are some, particularly of a criminal nature, which will not require such an immediate response. But for the most part, we will be covering matters that require urgent attention. Know your location. Oftentimes, security guards are simply handed the keys to a property and the rest is kind of left up to them. So make sure you tour your property, interior and exterior, anything or any areas where you might be responsible for. Know all of these areas. It can include your common areas, your storage rooms, your sprinkler rooms, electrical and utility rooms, even where hazardous materials are stored. So procedures for evacuation. First off, you want to make sure that you're remaining calm. You want to organize and remind people to evacuate in an orderly fashion. You want to have them evacuate through the nearest exit, depending on availability or the proximity of a threat. Now, a threat could be what potentially is causing the evacuation. Is there a fire or a smoke condition? Obviously, you don't want to draw people nearer to that. If you have a potentially an active shooter situation or somebody that's running around with a weapon, you want to, again, evacuate people from the proximity of where that person might be. You want to pay special attention to those with special needs or disabilities, also the elderly and small children. And just a reminder that elevators should not be used during fires or earthquakes. You want to guide evacuated people to a safe area, and if it's more practical, actually just have them leave the property. Providing 911 operators with specific information is important, as it will determine what type of response they will send. This is referred to as triaging, where a dispatcher will manage the priority of incoming calls against the available resources. When we talk about specific medical response, this mainly comes down to two methods. Basic life support, or BLS, which will always respond to all medical incidents, or more advanced response, which is just that, advanced life support, or ALS, and normally that's categorized as paramedics. Then on to requesting response for a criminal incident. We want to point out what type of crime is being reported. Is that crime in progress, or about to be committed, or already perhaps it's taken place? Are there any weapons involved and what type they might be? The number of suspects, the location and direction of flight of the suspects if they happen to be leaving the property. If your property experiences a major incident, such as a fully engulfed structure fire, an active or violent intruder incident, a mass exposure incident, there will most likely be a response from multiple agencies who would then coordinate and establish a command center to manage operations. Such a center can be set up in an emergency vehicle, a tent, or other place. They are designed to be quickly assembled so lead managers from each agency can work together. Depending on the incident, one agency will establish full command of the scene with other agencies working through this command. Major fire or disaster scenes or serious motor vehicle accident scenes in Delaware are coordinated by the fire department. When you encounter a person who may be having a heart attack, first thing is to immediately contact 911 or have somebody do it for you, as we would for any major medical emergency. If the person experiencing the heart attack is unconscious, not breathing, and has no pulse, one option you can consider is beginning cardiopulmonary resuscitation, better known as CPR. If you have not received CPR training, doctors recommend only performing chest compressions at a rate of 100 beats per minute. This is known as hands-only CPR. It does not involve mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Those professionally trained on CPR will do both chest compressions by hand and breathing by mouth. 911 dispatchers may even be able to instruct you on proper CPR procedures. There are three main types of bleeding. The one you want to be most concerned about is arterial bleeding, which is the most severe and urgent type of bleeding. It can result from a penetrating injury, blunt trauma, or damage to organs or blood vessels. A person with severe blood loss can bleed out within 5 minutes. Security professionals responding to medical emergencies should generally refrain from administering medications. However, there are circumstances where limited assistance can be provided. If somebody possesses their own medication, prescribed or over the counter, what security professionals can do is make it available for them to be able to administer it to themselves. You may assist in placing medication in someone's hand or gathering it from them at their request, but again, you're not a medical professional and you should not administer medications. Often people with known heart conditions may be prescribed what we call nitroglycerin to help them out, and there are other medical conditions that people may have their medication available and on hand as well. Most people are surprised to learn fire extinguishers may not be as effective as they imagined. An average-sized extinguisher will disperse all of its fire extinguishing agent within 8 to 10 seconds. Therefore, security personnel should not feel overly confident about putting an extinguisher up against a mid to large size fire. If the fire is small in size, attempt to put it out with the fire extinguisher as a way to minimize damage to the property. However, this is not a time to be overly confident about what you can accomplish with a fire extinguisher. If a smoke or fire are overwhelming, retreat immediately. Security's assistance will be determined based on management's plan to deal with the individual threat. This might include cursory checks of the property for anything unusual or suspect. Obviously, anything that stands out requires a halt to operations and intervention by professional first responders. So moving on to power outages that can occur at your property. Security professionals should be aware of where the temporary or backup lighting sources exist on their properties. That could be generators, where flashlights are actually stored, where there's emergency lighting. You want to also understand what emergency power will provide, what type of minimal coverage it will provide. What's going to be working when the lights and the power go down. Your cell phones are going to be essential in this circumstance because your landlines are not going to work. Most of them are hooked up to electricity and the internet now. Alarm responses, alarms may be triggered because of power outages, and then you have to take a look at anything else that might particularly affect your property that you're working at. Delaware is vulnerable to tornadoes. They have occurred in all parts of the state and affected many different communities and structures and resulted in serious injuries, death, and even property loss. Delaware, while one of the smaller states in the Union by landmass, is the 5th flattest state with relatively few mountainous areas to stop a formed tornado. However, most supercell variety tornadoes, which are 2.0 or higher on the Fujitsu scale, are unlikely. Security personnel should pay attention to watches and warnings posted for their areas and prepare others under their purview as a precaution. See the attached video on Get Weather Ready, what to do during a tornado. Incident response for security professionals will be different from the eventual response of the police. And security professionals want to be mindful that they don't confuse their role with the responding police officers. Some incidents initially responded to by security personnel may be quite similar to how the police would respond. Regardless, the police will take charge of a criminal incident upon their arrival. The police obviously have specialized training and legal authority to formally investigate a criminal act and, if necessary, to arrest and detain persons that might be involved or suspected of criminal activity. Security personnel should be concerned about the following when they're responding and assisting the police. Again, securing that crime scene, potentially keeping people away from areas that need to be preserved or might be dangerous for them to enter, obtaining any suspect information that might be available, victim or witness information also. These people tend to go away from a crime scene at times very quickly, so any information that you can ascertain about them would be very important to pass along to law enforcement. One of the most vital resources will be your CCTV surveillance and reviewing that, trying to get a good idea of what actually occurred during the incident. You may even have only partial coverage, but anything that can help contribute to that investigation will be appreciated by law enforcement. And again, when they do respond, if you can assist with any kind of secondary issues. Sometimes there may be only one or two police officers that can respond to a scene, and there might be other things that are going on that maybe security can assist with. If there are additional people that are involved with the incident, or family members, so on and so forth, that are arriving at your scene, those are all things that potentially security can help assist with law enforcement at these scenes. So the snippet of video that you just seen was actual footage from a altercation that was occurring inside a department store. This is something that a security guard potentially could be responding to or walk up upon or be notified about, and how it actually occurs. And, you know, just for the sake of argument, put yourself in the idea of being in that situation where that's what you're coming up on. You want to always be aware in these kind of situations, a weapon may have been introduced to the incident as a possibility. If people are willing to get that agitated and that angry with each other and resort to violence, there is always the potential for them to be able to turn to a weapon. You want to obviously request backup from other officers or the police right away, and if possible, you want to use your verbal commands from a safe distance or greater to encourage combatants to disengage. If and when it is safe, you want to potentially attempt to separate feuding parties, again, if that's possible. And your other priorities would be including any type of medical attention that you might be able to give, obtaining any of that witness or contact information, reviewing that CCTV or having a dispatcher doing it. And above all, just remember, again, don't take any sides, as you might not be aware of what actually provoked that incident. It could have been something that happened, you know, in a schoolyard or through social media or other means. You never really know what you're rolling up upon. Theft of mislaid property generally occurs when items are accidentally left unattended and they're removed without the owner's permission. Some common examples might be wallets, cell phones, other packages, or personal property that's left behind. Thefts can occur when items are removed from parked or unattended vehicles, or even a vehicle being removed entirely, a motor vehicle theft. And lastly, regarding illegal drug activity, is your personal safety. Security guards should avoid touching or disturbing illegal drug products unless somebody's personal safety is in immediate jeopardy. In other words, you have to get it away from somebody from the public or children that might be in the area or others. But disposal or removal of the product should be done in consultation with law enforcement. So we want to add a quick section on security interactions with juveniles and children. In Delaware, they recognize 18 as the age of majority when somebody is legally considered an adult. So we would be talking about people under that age, obviously. And we could be referencing a few things. Juveniles and children in medical situations, which are different than response for adults. And also if they are the victim of a crime or they're in the area or in the presence of adults that are committing crimes, or maybe they are actually the persons that are committing the crimes as well. So just a few things that we'll take a look at here. So far, all of our first responder sections have involved security contacting professional first responders for assistance with most of the areas we've covered: response to a medical incident, fire, natural or man-made disaster, criminal incidents. This section on civil incident and private property issues will mainly center around the security guard responding and dealing with the issue almost exclusively with guidance and policies set forth by property management. In most issues we will discuss, there really is no role for professional first responders as they cannot provide a remedy to such issues. Security guards will find themselves in a unique position of being the single source of correcting certain behaviors and enforcing property rules and regulations. As security guards, we operate at our client locations, and they are all private property, owned and operated by a specific person, company, or organization. Visitors may or may not be invited, but even though a private property invites the public, the owners and operators still oversee the property. As such, normally there are rules and regulations or a code of conduct in place at all such facilities, and these are normally enforced by private security guards. Perhaps think of private property like you would your own house or dwelling. So let's review some of the best practices so you know and understand these concepts. First off, locate, review, and understand the property code of conduct and confer with your management people, your owners, your operators for specific policies, rules, or regulations. If your understanding is not certain, ask questions to clarify. You want to know these policies equal or better than the person that you're interacting with. Understand how the owner and the operator wants the code of conduct enforced. Sometimes something that's written on a code of conduct, property management people actually don't want to go that far. They're just kind of implying that threat. Now you want to know that kind of information beforehand. And also seek advice from supervisors or other seasoned employees to understand criminal or illegal incidents versus legal or private property violations as well. The primary assessment of an animal observed inside a parked vehicle, usually a dog, is to observe if the animal is in immediate danger or they're unresponsive. Now, those of you that are pet lovers, myself included, you're going to be a little bit disheartened to find out that in Delaware, animals or pets are legally considered property and do not share the same legal protections naturally afforded to humans. Security guards should monitor the vehicle and immediately contact Delaware Animal Control, however that exists in your county, and it usually is divided up by county the way that it's administered. They are available to respond to such incidents. Okay, there are laws prohibiting animal abuse, but they must be enforced by animal control officers who have the legal authority. They may even issue citations or violations and take possession of mistreated animals as well. But again, your priority is to assess and then to hand that over to animal control. In Delaware, it is legal to openly carry a firearm in public unless specifically prohibited in a specific area. A citizen in Delaware may also possess a permit to carry a concealed deadly weapon. Normally, such a person complies with the appropriate training and they should not provoke attention to a properly concealed firearm. Law enforcement officers, local, state, and federal, are normally permitted to carry and possess firearms and should not be disturbed, even if they are on a property that restricts them. Regardless, such person should also be able to present valid credentials. Private armed security guards in Delaware will need to carry a Delaware State Security License red card, as we outlined before. Private property owners and operators may decide if citizens are permitted to openly carry firearms at their locations, as the property still remains the purview of the owner. This should generally be outlined in a property code of conduct and visually displayed. In the course of their duties, security guards will be expected to enforce property-specific policies regarding openly carrying firearms. Security guards may encounter situations when other persons may be offended or alarmed by a person openly carrying a firearm, and these are usually some of the circumstances that a property considers when they look to prohibit people openly carrying a firearm. Therefore, it is important that you understand the law and the property-specific rules and regulations. Security guards will operate in areas where they must fully anticipate and understand their actions, and events they respond to will potentially be recorded, both visually and by audio. Private property operators may restrict certain recordings. However, due to the ease of recording abilities and technologies, this may be difficult or even impractical to enforce in a lot of public environments. Generally, persons in a public area or an area where the public is openly invited do not have a reasonable expectation of privacy. Security guards may interact with incidents involving recordings that are controversial or provoke angry reactions. They might include children being recorded, people being recorded without their permission, recording of financial transactions. Generally, in those circumstances, again, even though they might seem inappropriate to certain people, again, it's that people not having a reasonable expectation of privacy. Generally, persons should have an expectation of privacy in private areas such as restrooms, family accommodation rooms, locker rooms, changing rooms, dressing rooms, etc. If there is any illegal act involving a recording, if it's alleged, law enforcement should be contacted. Under no circumstance should a security guard direct someone or do it themselves to delete, remove, or erase images or video, even if this will satisfy the person that's making the complaint. Security should not take possession of a camera, a cell phone, or other recording devices, and they shouldn't provide advice or suggest a person delete, remove, or erase images or videos as well. This is even problematic for law enforcement officers due to the Fourth Amendment. So you want to be very clear of your understanding of this particular policies at your property.
This is often how details are arranged in the details section of an incident report, but consult and utilize what might be required on your individual job assignment. As mentioned, your report may be relied upon in the future. You should also consider who will be examining and scrutinizing it. Certainly supervisors will review it initially, but later on an attorney, judge, jury, and others may have it in front of them. You also want to write a report for persons who do not know or understand your property and may have never even visited it. This is where specifics are important. The document you have written may need to speak for you one day in your absence. Perhaps you will change jobs or not be present at a legal proceeding. Photographs of an accident or crime incident are evidence. The old saying, "A picture is worth 1,000 words," holds true. Photos literally illustrate many factors about an incident. Security officers should obtain this evidence as soon as possible. This means pictures taken before housekeeping is able to clean or clear the area, evidence is distorted or removed due to weather conditions, or anything else which might disturb evidence in its organic form. To ensure validity, photos should be electronically time and date stamped, which is normally possible with most devices. Security officers should use agency or client-provided cameras or smartphones to obtain digital pictures. If you have an immediate need to record such evidence on a personal device, understand all photos and videos on the device become legally discoverable. Security's role would normally be review and preservation of such evidence. A review should be extensive and include time periods before, during, and after an incident. Lack of video evidence is also evidence. If you have a person reporting a crime or accident at a certain time and location and there is no video, this would directly contradict their allegation, or conversely, confirm it if there is footage of what they allege. Depending on the surveillance system, video may need to be archived within a certain time period. Multiple copies of archived video should be preserved as single copies can be misplaced or defective. Also, the video may be required by several sources. Consider video being used in exigent circumstances. For example, video may confirm where an active shooter was, or is located. A description of a dangerous criminal not in custody may be viewed, or perhaps the identity of a prohibited offender who was previously trespassed.
Asset protection and patrol procedures will review the basics of security work, including methods and techniques employed when performing everyday security functions. This section will concentrate on security professionals understanding situational awareness, which is fundamental to ensuring personal safety for you and the persons and properties you are charged with protecting. I recall having conversations with property management personnel over my time when I was in the industry and discussing the patrol of security officers, and a lot of them felt that it was somewhat wasted time, that their security officers really weren't doing anything. They were simply walking in one location or driving a vehicle in one location, and they weren't really accomplishing anything. And realistically, nothing could be further from the truth, because the idea of patrol is avoiding any type of distractions to what you should be doing, which is observing your environment for anything that's unusual or occurring within it. Patrol is an essential function of an active security plan. Now, when it's possible and allowable, through your security plan, patrol should be something that is not routine. It should be broken up into different patterns. Okay, in other words, where you would, walk one area or section of a property, and you wouldn't immediately go to the next one. You may, backtrack a little bit. You don't want to become predictable in these things. Violators will often observe patrol routines of security officers. They may be trying to outsmart them. They may be trying to time them out. So when the security officer is not present, that's when they can do what they want to do. They can go in, commit a burglary at that jewelry store. They can go in, attack somebody in the parking lot when you're, timing out your patrols, which are passing by the same area every 20 minutes or so, and your person that's watching the property and looking for these vulnerabilities is seeing that going on. So we don't want to have others being able to predict your patrol patterns, because it puts your safety at risk and the safety of the others that you're assigned to protect. The first element in providing for a guard's personal safety and that of the people and property they're assigned to protect is the idea of maintaining situational awareness. Now, situational awareness can be simply defined as being constantly aware of what is happening in your environment.
There may be several types of documentation required on your job assignments. The forms and how they are prepared may vary among different security agencies, or they may be the work product of your client. The most common for security personnel are incident reports and daily logs. How documentation is provided and submitted may be different as well. While most are provided in an electronic format, there may be situations where some or all documentation is still handwritten.
So with our starting points established, let's understand our goals when we're interacting with an adversary, trying to at times understand, but more often correct or alter behavior. First and foremost would be our safety. Having that interaction occur and the security professional remaining safe. Next, having a positive interaction, in other words, getting to a point where your adversary actually understands they need to correct their behavior and why they need to do so. And third would be compliance, having the adversary actually comply with your request to change their behavior or follow the direction that you've stipulated for them. A good day for a security professional in terms of adversarial interactions is achieving goal number 1, safety. No matter the outcome, you come away safe and sound. A better day is accomplishing goals number 1 and 3, both safety and compliance. You interacted safely and got the person to do what was necessary. Perhaps they were not happy with you, but they still complied, and you were safe as a result. The best day is accomplishing all 3, safety, compliance, and a positive interaction, where the adversary understood why they were corrected, or at least listen to your explanation of why it mattered. You may not accomplish all 3 goals in every interaction, so don't be discouraged by that. Getting to goals 1 and 3 are tough enough. Getting all 3, well then you've really worked your magic in that particular interaction. Fully listen to your adversary and show them that you are listening. Don't interrupt them. We've all been in conversations where the other person is talking and we think of something that we need to add or correct to that conversation, and we end up interrupting them or speaking over them. In that kind of situation, neither person truly hears what the other is saying. Remain neutral. Refrain from making judgments about the person or their message. If you're judging, you're not really completely listening. This is going to be a little bit difficult for those more seasoned employees we spoke about already, who tend to be a little bit more pessimistic. Now, it's somewhat understandable that if you're dealing with somebody doing the same thing wrong repeatedly, that's going to be very, very difficult for you to, remain neutral in that kind of situation because you've been down this road before. But, if you can try to adjust things just for that moment in time, it might help you out a little bit. As we have reviewed, security personnel can approach persons about misconduct, rule violations, or suspicious activity, but they should always be cautious. Such contacts can provoke an already agitated person or cause them to become aggressive. Our goal is to provide security personnel with the knowledge and skill to more safely and effectively make contact with a potentially aggressive person, which we have defined appropriately in our prior section as an adversary, while displaying the most authority with the least amount of risk. As security personnel, your stance and positioning along with your appearance are extremely powerful methods of nonverbal communication. They can have a positive or a negative impact on the situation that you're handling. Assessing the situation accurately and acting appropriately from the start goes a long way towards ensuring officer safety and a safe resolution to any situation. In our communications section, we explain the art of being able to read people. I say art because it most certainly is a refined skill. It is developed better through experience, and it needs to be consistently practiced for it to remain viable. At times, it will be evident an adversary is agitated, so you want to consider elements of your approach. You may be dealing with someone who can be provoked into deeper agitation and lash out more forcefully or even become violent. Other times, the message of what an adversary has going on will be more subtle and maybe even develop as he or she is approached. There are persons who will appear calm and stable but then suddenly react if they feel threatened or cornered. Regardless, reading an adversary means looking for certain red flags which are warning signs something is wrong. The last tactic is the positioning of your hands, which need to be different from what they might ordinarily be in a general public interaction. Your hands or arms should never be resting on your utility belt or other equipment, or certainly not in your pockets. Your hands may become your weapons, and placing them too low decreases your reaction time. Placing them in the center of your chest cavity allows for faster reaction times to either defend by blocking or using your hands as weapons to strike if necessary. And lastly, you never want to be in what we would call an inside position. In this position, you are immediately in front of or within reach of your adversary. This is why we're explaining that approaching somebody and angling is much, much better. The inside position is extremely dangerous. Every organ in your body, with the exception of your brain, is concentrated in the central area of your body. The inside position leaves you open and vulnerable to any attack. When security guards interact with a subject who is being an issue, maybe a rule violator or someone acting suspicious, their first step should be to advise their dispatcher or other guards that they are doing so. If it appears necessary, they should request assistance. There is no logic in dealing with something which could escalate if other backup is available. This tactic will focus on the role of a contact guard and a cover guard. The initial guard who is approaching the subject is the contact guard and responsible for the initial conversation or contact with the subject. When a second guard arrives, he or she is the cover guard, and their role should be limited to observing the contact guard and the subject as opposed to immediately approaching and joining the contact guard, as this could tend to overwhelm or agitate the subject. The contact guard should proceed with the conversation while the cover guard observes and also keeps watch on the exterior environment, perhaps observing for others who might look to come and interfere or disrupt the flow of the initial contact. In this tactic, the cover guard has the ability to immediately back up the contact guard if necessary, but also, again, monitor for any outside interference. Should additional guards arrive, they should assume the role of cover guards as well. While the effort to enlist citizens in these tasks was not the original idea of Napolitano, she emphasized how the government needed to reach out and engage private sector partners and citizens who are often in the best position to be vigilant for suspicious activity. And those citizens play an essential role in uncovering potential terrorist activity. In our role as security professionals, we are on the front line of such efforts. We are often in the position of being able to first observe and detect signs of potential terrorism. Both local and state law enforcement have worked to develop relationships with whom they refer to as private sector partners, and especially those concentrated in what are defined as high-value targets. Targets simply mean venues or properties that terrorists may specifically select to commit an attack. High value means a target where, should such an attack take place, it would most likely have a resounding effect on the community and the nation. For example, a terrorist attack at Dover Speedway during a NASCAR event, or a mass shooting at a large shopping center. Targets are also defined in terms of being soft or more hardened. Some examples would be a shopping center, such as the Christiana Mall, where there are a number of different entrances and exits, and people can get in relatively easily and get out relatively easily. Other areas that are more hardened would be, for example, the Dover Speedway, where during events there is limited egress and ingress, and usually they are controlled with metal detectors and other devices. More hardened targets would be your pharmaceutical locations or your oil refinery that's in Delaware City. These have very controlled environments, and access to that is extremely limited. Security personnel work at all such locations and more in Delaware and across the nation. So when we say we're on the front lines, this is what it means, and this makes sense as security personnel truly are on the front lines of combating terrorism. As we discuss terrorism, we have alluded to active shooter incidents, which fall under the more broad definition of a violent intruder incident, which can be a firearm, edged weapon, knife attack, a vehicle-borne attack, and potentially some others. Perhaps experts may define them as a subset of incidents, but in reality, violent intruder incidents are terrorist acts as well, regardless of the offender, their intention, or their motivations. While we need to be vigilant against all types of terror, violent intruders seem to be standing out, or at least appear to be happening with more and more frequency. For example, the first half of 2023 saw a record number of active shooter incidents in the United States. As security professionals, we need to assess our working environments. This may include seeing or hearing about a particular person that maybe has some violent tendencies and being aware of them, or that person that seems to be angry way too often or is easily provoked. When we're talking about employment environments, everybody has an issue with the boss now and again, but what about that employee who has a true hatred for the boss? Oftentimes, we are the people to hear the gossip, the rumors, and yes, a lot of that has to be taken with a grain of salt and sometimes dismissed as that's truly what it is. But are we being aware, keenly aware of, and looking for those missing nuggets of information, if you will? We have to understand, as security personnel, oftentimes we're the gatekeepers. We're seen as the protectors, and maybe even that one person that can see somebody who might be in distress or hear about somebody that might be in distress, and in turn might be able to turn. These are the people that they're turning to us. Is there an employee telling you that they have a PFA, protection from abuse order? Or are they telling other people this? Or there's potentially a reason why they're telling this. They're scared. They think that that person that they have the protection order against may come and truly try to harm them. That's extremely alarming for them, obviously. But they're telling you that for a reason. They're trying to put you on notice to a certain extent a lot of times. That employee who was just terminated and threatened the boss or other employees that they didn't like working with. Do you know about that? Are you aware of that circumstance? Are you aware whether that person has access to that building or to that area still? Do they still have keys? Are they going to return? Have they promised to return? Or that tenant who maybe has a business practice resulting in an unusual amount of customer complaints, or maybe there's potentially some controversial social aspect about that business. Or you have that customer that keeps returning because they're unhappy. Not all of these things are necessarily going to turn into a violent intruder incident. In fact, the large majority of them are not. They're simply, the foundations of complaints that we deal with every day. The reality is that we want to be aware of these things. We want to be aware of these things as potential threats so we can act, so we can maintain our vigilance and do the things that we do as security professionals. What do you do when these indicators and predictors are present? First off, anything of an immediate nature would require you to involve law enforcement right away. But for the majority of these issues, they usually develop over time, so be proactive. Discuss what you have learned with others so they can be vigilant for the same indicators and predictors you're observing. Maybe then they can even add some context or clarification. This information should never be used as gossip or for personal enjoyment. Such matters should be confidential to the protectors who need to know such information. Be professional and discreet. Make sure supervisors and management personnel are aware for the same reasons. Depending on circumstances and often in coordination with management, it may be best to refer such information to the authorities eventually, as they are the ones able to investigate and better understand if there is a potential threat. Lastly, do your job as a protector. Be vigilant. Pay special attention to that tenant who has concerns or that employee who feels unsafe. Oftentimes, just the idea that a professional is watching may be sufficient to dissuade an offender. Remember our example of the Pulse nightclub. The offender was dissuaded twice before he acted. What if he observed the same security environment on his third try? During trainings, I have had students tell me they no longer plan to work in the security field as they felt it was too dangerous, or they never imagined they might be put in harm's way. I dare say that they probably should have done a little bit more research. Hopefully your training has provided you with the ability to understand the potential threats that exist and showed you several methods to better manage them safely, including the option to retreat based on circumstances. There have also been students who tell me if there was an active shooter or a violent intruder event, they are not paid enough. Their life is too valuable and they would simply quit and go home. This is also your prerogative. What we all need to recognize is awful and dangerous events can happen pretty much anywhere at any time. Most people will understandably run from danger, but as we have seen, events don't always occur as we expect they might. What about an incident where you can't escape, where your options are limited? This can happen to Joe the citizen or Joe the security guard, anytime. Walking down Main Street, shopping in the market, going to your place of employment, during a doctor's appointment. So even if you're not on duty as a security person, the reality is everybody needs to be prepared. Moreover, if you have chosen to do security work, people still anticipate you to be a leader during an emergency. You're the one that they're going to see wearing the uniform. You know the nearest exits, the places to seek shelter. You're trained to provide medical attention. All of this will potentially be expected upon you. In developing or integrating an emergency plan, security professionals need to understand response during the first 5 minutes of a violent intruder mass casualty incident, as this will be the time to focus on. Most likely, armed law enforcement will respond and take command of the scene during this time period or shortly after this time period. We've already stressed this when discussing emergency incident response, which is really not any different here. The three highest priorities are get law enforcement to your scene, help whoever you can, including yourself, with either evacuating or seeking shelter. Then assist law enforcement when they arrive and it's safe to do so. When you start your planning with the idea of thinking about staffing, it's very simple. Who is on duty, such as dispatchers, roving patrols, vehicle patrols. If an incident begins to unfold, you will move quickly by getting law enforcement and other first responder resources on their way. This can be done with a dispatcher or anyone who has access to a phone, really. But make sure someone is tasked with this duty. Also understand members of the public may be calling 911 at the same time, and systems can be overwhelmed during a major emergency. Having a property security person speak directly with 911 will be important, as specific details and locations can be explained. If the security personnel contacting 911 is also utilizing CCTV at the same time to provide real-time information, this is optimal. This may even require 2 or more security persons to operate cameras, maybe do public address emergency announcements, talk to 911, etc. Although they may be rare, consider any and all possibilities that other law enforcement or armed security persons that are either on your property already, or even if they're associated with somebody that's different from your security agency, or they work at a property tenant. Again, the goal is getting an armed person to the area so a potential attacker can be neutralized. You may recall a shooting in the Texas Mall in May of 2023, where a police officer on site for a different event actually neutralized the offender. So 911 is a definite call, but always keep in mind any appropriate personnel that might be in the area as well. After using all available avenues to notify and bring law enforcement or armed personnel to your site, you can move on to step 2. Should you be in the proximity of the threat, remember your personal safety, as you cannot help others should you become a victim. At the same time, you might be taking shelter or escaping or actively working to assist others. Keep in mind how you will be viewed as a leader again. People in an emergency will follow your direction, as you wear the uniform and presumably know your property. Seeking shelter or hiding or escaping, maybe running away, will be based on circumstances as to what is the best option. Are you far enough away from the attacker to escape? Is there available a viable hiding location? Run, hide, and fight is best demonstrated in the attached video of the same title, which should be viewed as part of this training section. When viewing this in terms of available staffing, if there are exterior patrols, this will depend on where the incident occurs. If it's inside, these exterior patrols should dismount and come inside to help evacuate and lead people to shelter. Your interior patrols, same priorities. Let's say you're the only person on duty alone, or you have limited personnel. You may need assistance from others, such as client employees or managers. If jobs such as getting 911 notified or sheltering or having them lead people to safety are possible, use whatever resources might be available to you. Other considerations might be safe meeting places for evacuated individuals once law enforcement does arrive, triaging the injured if there are any. Witnesses and victims should confer with law enforcement once the scene is secured, but they should only remain close to the property if they are able to do so in a safe location. There will be other steps in response, but again, here you're working on the basics, the initial response, getting to the point where those first responders are getting at your scene.